there's a certain assumption that in order to influence somebody, you have to be high on the org chart. Well, wait a minute. Just think of your own life experience. Has anyone low on an org chart ever influenced you? Have you ever seen anyone low on an org chart influence? Right? There's a certain
Absolutely.
assumption that it has to be that way.
Welcome to Frontline Women, a show dedicated to women on the leading edge of change and culture renewal in America. I'm Dalisia Coppersmith, and I'll be your host and guide as we explore emerging issues and opportunities for women to lead side by side with men every day. So let's get off the sideline and onto the front line right now.
Yep.
Today, we're going to talk about influence. And as if you don't already know, influence, persuasion, rapport, body language, these are all things that are absolutely essential in every relationship that we have or want to have in the future. Mastering them is the highest yield productivity tool known to humankind, according to our guest today, Dr. Ed Tori. He's here to help us increase and use our powers of influence for good everywhere we go. He's the former director of the Influence Center at one of the largest healthcare systems on the East Coast, and now he assists people with learning the science of persuasion for better communication, interpersonal impact, and behavior change. Dr. Tori also speaks on influence and persuasion across industries, anywhere people are looking to do good in the world. And I stress that because he really is a principled person who doesn't want you to use persuasion to manipulate, but he wants you to use it for good. So if your organization or community is looking for a great talk on influence, reach out. There'll be a link in the show notes. Ed, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I'm going to dive right in. So I mentioned quickly that you were a physician. So you spent the bulk of your adult life as a physician, but you noticed some things while you were practicing, and it led you to focus a lot of your efforts, your passion, your purpose in life on this topic of influence. So tell me, in your career in the medical profession, what were you noticing that your peers didn't seem to notice? What were you seeing that they weren't?
Yeah, I would say that early on, actually, most of it was very internal in the sense that I thought that the way to success in medicine was if you're the first one to raise your hand and answer the question right, if you're the one that can regurgitate the fact or come up with whatever the academic thing was, that's how you so-called win, right? But
The shining star resident, right?
right, yeah, and there was a moment where one time I actually thought of leaving because I was about to answer a question. And I was an older resident, and a younger medical student answered it before me, and they were right, and I would have been wrong had I answered it. And so I actually had this like sort of micro crisis going on, but at the same time, I absolutely fell in love with the craft of delivering care because I loved people, right? But at one point, I would say I learned that internally, while I thought everyone was like, if you're the first one to raise your hand, you win, I also was looking for an exit, right? Now, my undergrad degree was in Africana Studies, and I was looking for a way out of healthcare because I simultaneously saw that the people ahead of me, my mentors, the people that were further along in their career, many of them were jaded. Many of them didn't like their work. They were burning out. They were exhausted. They didn't know their families. And I kind of didn't want that life. So I started looking for a way out, and I started some online businesses, one in the medical.
Can I pause? Because that amazes me about you, that you went through medical school, which is no joke.
Yeah,
The torturous term of residency,
sure.
also no joke. And you looked at this profession, this community, this culture that you were about to step into for the rest of your adult life, and it didn't align with what you wanted in your life or who you were as a person. Now, and I don't know many people who are willing to say, I can better serve this world, and my family maybe on a slightly different path, maybe related, but slightly different, because we're so hesitant to give up the ground that we've gained, whether it's through our education or through years in a career. I ask women to really look at what they're doing and what their purpose in life is. And you don't always have to quit your job. I mean, I don't encourage women to go quitting their jobs,
Right.
but we have to figure out who we are, what we're about, and what our unique perspective can bring, to the world. And you did that. I thought that was quite brave. you did something long before COVID and how everybody got brave and decided to quit jobs. You've always been that way. And it wasn't because of burnout or complaining about people. It was just like alignment. Like you have this internal drive toward purpose, alignment, principles. And I admire that about you. And that I wanted to highlight that because we are talking about influence. And
Yeah,
I
yeah.
want listeners to know I'm not sitting here dealing with a used car salesman.
Right,
I'm
right.
talking with, I invited a man who really has for forever, I guess, been in touch with who you are, and you're not going to compromise your principles, and you do use your powers for good. So thank you for doing that.
Actually, I'm going to share a quick caveat. One time I was standing in a patient's room, and a nurse and a couple other folks were taking care of a patient, and I was waiting. I couldn't help. There were too many people around the bed. And so I found myself just staring out the window. And the nurse looked over at me and she said, "Dr. Tori, are you okay? Let's step outside." And so we walked outside and we started talking in the hallway. And she's like, "What's going on? Are you okay?" And I was like, "Yeah, I think I should have been a nurse." And she said, "What? Why? What? You? Like, we love when you have our patients. Like, what do you mean?" And I said, "Well, I see the connection you have with the patient, their family, the techs that come in the room, the social workers. Like, I long for that. I think that's why I entered medicine. I should have been a nurse." So anyway,
Oh my
there's
gosh.
that,
Okay.
there's that caveat. So,
The reason I said, oh my gosh, okay, is because I'm like, you're going to make me cry right now.
okay,
So
I was fighting back a little bit there.
no, I
My
know
own things,
that,
because I
I
was
mean,
reliving
that's
it.
the real stuff in life,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah,
That's, oh,
yeah, yeah.
okay.
So I had an experience right before when I started to think I was going to pursue another career. I had an experience where I was sitting in a break room with a cardiologist, and I heard he just had a granddaughter, and so I congratulated him. I was like, "Hey, congratulations on your birth of your granddaughter!" And his face got long, his eyes welled up. He looked down at the floor, and he said, "You know, when my granddaughter was born, my daughter handed her to me and said, 'I'm going to be there for her, unlike you.'" And I was like,
Wow.
"Oh, I cannot have this life. Like, what am I going to do?" So my first path was to think, well, I can't do much with my undergrad degree. I can teach maybe, but that won't cover the medical debt. So what could I do? And so I started trying these online businesses. I started medical humor stuff and also some training. This is early 2000s, by the way, training for interns and residents and things like that. So I started those online and I realized, I need to learn how to market. So my strategy was, I can't go back to school. I'm still in my training, my medical training. So I called up a semi-famous in the marketing world, a semi-famous marketer, and I said, "Hey, I'm not a weirdo, but I have a weird question. Can I come learn from you?" "Can I come learn from you?" And he's like, "What do you mean? What does that look like?" And I was like, "Well, I have a vacation coming up. I could take a week of that, fly out to wherever you are, study, like see how you see the world, and then I'll study whatever you tell me to study. And if we can keep in touch, that would be awesome." And so that's what we did for a full year. So I flew out 1 week, saw how he saw the world, studied what he told me to study. We connected every once in a while. I attended one of his
Opened your
events.
mind.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And then the following year, I decided to do the same thing. I needed to learn how to write persuasively. So I called up a semi-famous direct response copywriter. Those are the guys that write persuasively, like 7 ways to six-pack abs without leaving your desk. You won't believe number 3. So I called up somebody well-known in that space. And I said, "I'm not a weirdo, but I have a weird question. Can I learn from you?" And what happened is, so first of all, they said yes, set up like a year-long apprentice relationship with them, but kept doing the medical thing. And all of my relationships improved across the board
Wow.
with patients, with their families, with other physicians, nurses, social workers, case managers, my in-laws, my kids, my wife, my neighbors, my friends. Across the board, my relationships
So that
improved.
was no joke.
It
What
was
you were
no joke.
learning.
It was
Yeah.
like, yeah, it's like
Yeah.
you take it in one context and apply it in another. And all of a sudden, I realized that it's not about you raise your hand first and you answer the question right and you win. You regurgitate the fact and you win. No, it's about the connection with people.
Mhm.
And so then I became intoxicated by learning this craft. And so each year I took the same tact. I'm not a weirdo, but I have a weird question. Can I come learn from you? Um, so
Can we
I
steal
did
that,
that.
Ed?
What's that?
Can we steal that?
I'm not a weirdo.com,
Yeah.
like, or something like that. Yeah, sure. Go ahead. By the way, I don't know if that's a real thing, so don't search that. So anyway, that was my path to learning this stuff. And I studied from hypnotists, hypnotherapists, neurolinguistic programming, human factors engineers, cognitive psychologists. I saw people playing a game on the metro in DC on their phone, and I noticed some influence and hypnosis principles in there. So I call up the developer and say, "Hey, do you guys use hypnosis?" And they're like, "Yeah, of course we do."
You
So
are
I
endlessly curious
so
and
yeah, so each
unafraid
year it's
to
just a
reach
different
out.
topic. Yeah. And so then it just kind of brought it back to healthcare because I fell back in love because I love science, I love people, I love connection. And what better place to do that than when you're serving people at their most vulnerable time? So it all aligned, but it took me a while to find that alignment. So that's how I ended up at this influence thing. And what happened is people started to call me the patient whisperer. So this is where I started to realize something was different. They would say, hey, Dr. Tori, I know this isn't your patient, but I need one of those patient whisperer consults. They're freaking out. Can you come calm them down? Or this family doesn't get it. Can you help? And then people started bringing their personal problems and then all these things. So that's how I realized there was something there. But then
Mm-hmm.
I also said, you don't need me. You can do this yourself. You're already doing it in other settings. You're at home raising your kids. You're out with your friends and consoling them when they have a breakup or a loss, right? Like you're already doing it. So I just went on a mission to help people be able to do that more
Yeah.
deliberately and
And
better.
starting within the medical field, but it certainly is not
Yeah.
limited to the medical field.
Right. Right.
So I'm glad you're not just serving the medical field anymore. You serve all
Yeah.
industries.
Right.
And
Right. And my kids are a great testing ground. With 6 of them, I can test all kinds of things.
yeah, 6 kids. Everybody hear that? 6 kids, a wonderful wife, just a beautiful family. So do me a favor and define influence for us, because everybody has their own definition floating around in their minds. Some people think it's good, some people think it's bad. So tell us how you define influence.
Yeah. So I define influence as the ability to shape somebody's state, the ability to shape states, to shape frames, to change behaviors, and to do that in a good way, to influence in the short term and in the long term. Oftentimes, when people think of persuasion, that's like more like a short term action, get someone to take an action. Whereas influence can have a lasting impact. If you've ever met somebody or had a conversation that was just like a moment of pivot, a moment of insight, a moment of that lasts and sticks with you, that's
Yes.
where I think influence lives. So now, but you alluded to when is it manipulative or when is it dirty or underhanded or evil. There are times where it can be that, and that is when it violates. There are a couple parts to this. One is intent. Okay, intent. Okay,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah. So your intention to speak to somebody, to have a conversation, to move them in a direction, your intent behind that really matters. So coming from a place of good intent to serve, okay, that's vital.
Mm-hmm.
The next piece is for it to be for it to be part of the social contract. In other words, if I'm there as a physician, then my role, and they are there as a patient, my role is to get them to a better to get to focus on their well-being and their health and their if you are a parent and you have a child, your role, the social contract is you're raising your child, right? Like it's your job. And so that's where I view influence. Wherever you are doing your job, your role, fulfilling it, you're doing it for good in the service of others,
Mm-hmm.
then that's when you're moving people to a better place. So when people are either deceptive, have bad intent, it's self-serving, or they violate the social contract, that's where they've stepped out of bounds. But I would say one of the bigger problems is that too often we think that being deliberate is manipulative, and that's not the case. Not at all. In fact, when you go to a friend's house, I said this earlier, right? You go to a friend's house because they had a breakup or they lost somebody. Why are you going there? Are you going, like, what are you doing? Are you going to move them to a better place? Are you going to help them through the grieving process? Are you going to, well, that's influence.
That's right.
And in fact, it's your job. It's your
Yeah.
job. That's what friends do.
Helping is influence. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. A lot
Yeah.
of times. Yeah. So, how do you move people past aversion if they have an aversion? Because here's what I see and hear, from some of my clients and colleagues and friends, that it's almost like a virtue to not be influential. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like, if you have something to say, if you have a contribution to make, being the wallflower or constantly giving away credit to other people because you think it is a virtue to not be influential, like somehow being influential is dirty. How do you help people get past that mindset about influence? Like, what do you say to them to help them see it differently?
Yeah, so it's interesting. First is that I focus on service. I think when you're focusing on serving the other people, then if you think about it, who do you want to serve? How far do you want to serve? How big do you want to serve? You will not be able to serve if you're hiding or self-sabotaging or squashing your influence on others. Not only that, many times the very ones that think it's more honorable or ethical, moral to sort of hold back because they don't want to be step into a space of arrogance or too assertive or those sort of things. Those very people, almost across the board, are the exact ones that need to step up because
Absolutely.
they're the ones with the sensitivity around it, so that they're going to guard against stepping over that boundary. Right?
Yes, yes,
They're
and
the
this
one.
is, of course, this podcast is primarily for women, and not only for women, but I am trying to get women to step up into leadership, and that does require us to be unafraid to be influential. We can't be hesitant. We have to be influential, and even for an organization, when we think about high tech organizations or government organizations that feel like if they put let's say they put an idea or a strategy out there and it wasn't well received, they just want to kind of say, well, they said no, oh well. But here's where that can go wrong. I had a client that they proposed a piece of work that is future focused. I'll just say that this is government related, future focused work, and they were really really afraid to propose it because they thought, our let's see, another organization is not going to like this, because it could cut into what, they would get for work and whatnot. But the principle of it really is where you have to focus. Like, the principle is, what's the best thing? What is the best thing for the customers of that organization? What is the best thing for the country, when it comes to something like that? And sometimes it is time to compete. And that's not a dirty word either, because if you are doing it for the greater good, you're proposing something. You don't get to decide necessarily. But if you're not even trying to influence the outcome because you think it's wrong to do that, or you're betraying somebody else if you happen to win something, or influence people. We have to get over all of that, because it is 100% about, do we have pure intentions? And that's what I love about your work, because there are so many people talking about influence out there, and that's great. And they have tips and techniques. But what speaks to me, and I think, my community, about the way you go about your work, is that it is 100% dependent on pure intentions,
Mm-hmm.
because otherwise you're just
Yeah.
using techniques, and you might get somewhere with them, good luck, but you won't have that sense of fulfilling a purpose and having truly a positive impact, the way that I think a lot of women want to. We shy away from it because we look at the news, we look at politics, we look at salespeople, and we say, yeah, yuck, I don't want to be like that. I want to do good. And so I'm here to tell you, this is the person who can help us do that, to influence the world for good. I mean, Ed won't even work with organizations who lack ethical practices, principles. Like, really, he would rather not take the work, and I respect that so much. So anyway, I keep going on about you because I admire you. So since we're talking mostly to women in this podcast, do you see themes? And I don't know how much work you've done specifically with women, or if this would just be based on your own life experience and what you have seen with colleagues and family members and friends. But do you see any themes with women in particular, as far as like how they influence, or where they get in their own way as they're trying to influence. So tell me what you've seen as an expert in the field around women and this topic of influence.
Yeah, sure. So first is that there are certain tendencies that I see crop up again and again. One, for example, is that I have to earn influence. It's not something I step into. It's not something I claim. It's not something that is a part of my character. It's something I have to earn it. And so
In
it's
terms of
almost
like
like,
position, what do you?
well, position, and also whether or not people go through with that rollout or whatever your proposal was, or they take your answer or your idea and run with it. It's almost like they have to earn it, which makes it external. But the influence work that is so vital to us, being that to actually move people, right? Moving people, you don't move them with the data or the position or those things. You move them with emotion. And one of the innate gifts, and I would say sort of like the superpower that many women are already showing up with is a relational lens. Okay, a relational lens, and this is often stripped from the corporate sterile, data analytical. It's precisely what's needed.
It
Okay,
is.
so to think that I have to earn it and wait for someone else to tell me that, oh, now that's one tendency I see. Another is there's an instinct, I think it's instinct, to protect the relationship at hand. Okay,
Yes.
so in other words, yeah, if you have to deliver firm, difficult news to somebody, this the a tendency I see, especially in women leaders, is to try to preserve the relationship in a way that without, sort of, they let their authority suffer a bit. I don't know, in a way, it's like a self-sabotage type thing that occurs. So that's another thing that
Yeah, I think sometimes we're too careful, and we soft. I call it soft pitching
mm, yeah,
um, the news, whatever it is. Let's say if we are looking for a different behavior out of someone, and their behavior is not helpful to the team or to the organization, and we want to have a conversation with them about that. Women, and I shouldn't even say just women, because I've noticed this with technical leaders of all genders, but definitely women will soft pitch the message that they want to deliver, so much so that the person leaves thinking they're doing a great job. So they are, whether it's the kick them, what is it, kick them, kiss them, what is it? Kiss them, kick them, kiss them. That's right. Sandwich feedback
yeah,
type
yeah,
of
yeah,
thing
yeah,
that is really ineffective,
right.
because the person really doesn't leave fully understanding and feeling committed to making that change again for the greater good. So we do reduce our influence by soft pitching things and apologizing. That's another thing. Apologizing for asking for something from someone, if it's a behavior change, especially, it's followed up by all kinds of, I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Like, what is all that? Why do we do that?
Well, one of the things that also is that I think for the most part, there's like a relational radar that where you're in tune with what happens. I guess the best way to explain this is like, imagine somebody walks up, you're in a group of, mixed group of people at work or in some sort of setting, whatever, it could be networking, it could be wherever, and someone makes an inappropriate joke. Now,
Been there.
what would happen is in that moment, some people will go ha 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 and laugh like everybody else in the thing, right? Others will sort of like, you'll see them freeze, like they'll start to look around and like do whatever, and not like, and wonder like, am I the only one feeling this way?
Mhm.
And then there are others, those who are deeply empathic, who will look around and see that someone was upset or see that someone was this and see that. Like, I feel like that relational radar to detect discomfort, our tendency, especially when we're coming from a caring, nurturing kind of, our tendency is to try to fix the discomfort, right? So that's one of the reasons why when we're having an interaction with somebody and we soften it, because we detect the discomfort. But so I feel like that's one of the ways that self-sabotage happens, especially among women leaders, and those
I think that
becoming.
we don't plan what to do next. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean? If
yeah,
we are in tune with that, regardless of our gender, if we are in tune with what's happening at the table, so to speak, then we might freeze, but we notice, and then we don't see ourselves as maybe having a right or wanting to take the risk of influencing that situation.
yeah, yeah. It feels far too risky at that moment, right? And so, but what's really interesting is if you compare what how is one influencing at home versus at work, and if you compare the home setting versus the work setting, oftentimes the home setting is more integrated. There's authority, there's caring, there's it's more dynamic. You can do, you have a fuller range of influence tools at your disposal with a spouse or siblings or children or older parents, right? You have a full arsenal of, arsenal is the wrong word. I would say a full tool belt and
Mm-hmm.
skill set that you bring to bear at home. But then when you get into work, it's like there's a mask. It's like compartmentalized. Oh, here I have to be this way. But in
Well,
fact, that
there could be an authority difference
yeah,
too.
yeah,
So we
right,
have the authority, maybe equal authority with our partner at home, hopefully,
yeah,
hopefully.
yeah,
But then when we go to work, we are in a structure that is
yeah,
different from that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, but then sometimes we'll quell or squash our own gifts. And by the way, let me say this: most of the workplaces that we all work in are what they call complex systems, right? Complex adaptive systems, where each individual in the workplace has, they have a role, they can impact the whole, and the whole can impact the individual. But what's most important in a complex system is the relationship between the parts. It's not the actual parts. And so those with relational skills should bring them to bear. Too often our workplaces are devoid of them. And so
And
bringing
that's
those
what
skill
everybody
sets forward.
complains about. That
Yeah.
that is what we hear, is that
Yeah.
people feel less connected. More and more we feel less connected because number one, people aren't as skilled at being connected. Like, it's just the world we live in today. We tend to be more disconnected, whether it's remote work or just people that don't even know how to be in a room and connect with other people because we've
Hmm.
lost that skill. you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. Yeah.
So all those reasons that we know of, so people aren't as easy to connect with, and we're not as skilled as at connecting.
Hmm.
And then we put people in leadership positions who, rather than build that skill, they would rather dismiss the importance of it.
Yeah. They
And
call it a
that's where we're
soft
being led.
skill, reptilian brain, soft skill. It's something like, oh,
And
it's
it's just,
vital.
just it's diffusing their own discomfort with being unskilled in that area. I
Right.
think. I think it's a
Right.
defensive
Yeah.
mechanism.
It is. It externalizes it. It's something else. It's not a, yeah. So yeah, I think those are important parts. Um, may I share a couple of examples of,
Oh yes.
okay, so, um, and I'm going to de-identify it in all kinds of ways so that it never, no one knows who it is. But there was somebody who reached out to me, and my point in telling you this story right now is to say that you have more control over things that influence people for good, for optimum, relationships and optimum outcomes than you can imagine. And so I'm going to give one quick example. There was a woman who was a leader, a rising star. This is in the healthcare space. She was a rising star nationally, but she worked in a particular city, in a particular hospital, and the people that she supervised, the other physicians, she advocated for them in all kinds of ways. She advocated for them to get positions, she advocated for them to get raises, and all these things. But when the time came for her to seek a raise, she was denied 3 times in a row. And so she called me and she's like, "Look, I'm going to leave this organization if I don't, because I don't feel like I'm valued here."
Breaks my heart
Um,
to hear these
yeah,
stories. Yep.
right. So I asked her a few questions. I said, "So tell me where were you when you were having the conversation about you having a raise?" And she's like, oh, I was in, the chair's office. I was in his office, the chair of the department. I was sitting in his office. I was like, oh, describe it to me. She said, oh, he has a big mahogany desk. He has these two monitors, all these accolades on the back wall and awards and trophies and whatnot. And I was like, okay, so where are you sitting? She's like, oh, I'm sitting in front of him, a little bit lower in a chair. I was like, okay, who else sits there? Like when he has other meetings. She's like, oh, medical students, his secretary, other things. And I was like, okay, what were you wearing? She's like, oh, I was wearing my white coat, my stethoscope. I was like, what do med students wear when they sit there? She's like, oh, their white coat, their stethoscope. I was like, yeah, you can't have this meeting there. You have to change the setting. See, sometimes just changing the setting will all of a sudden open that. So I said, show up, schedule a meeting and show up, put a 15-minute buffer on either end and show up with your outdoor coat on. You're outdoor, like we're going somewhere. And when you get there and he says, oh, sit down. And you say, no, we're going to go to the coffee shop. We're going to go to Panera, Starbucks, whatever. We're going to go down to the coffee shop. And I'll be like, what's wrong? I want to talk to you about something that's a personal matter. Now, imagine this. And by the way, don't say anything else. As you start walking, what's he thinking? Oh my God, she's having septuplets. Oh my God, she has cancer. Oh my God, she's leaving. Oh my God, this. Oh my God, that.
Yeah.
Right? And then you get there, and I said, now when you sit in the coffee shop, pick a spot along the wall and angle yourself slightly away. Don't lean in. Don't lean right into his face. Angle yourself slightly away, like you're sitting on a wall at a coffee shop, and then start to have the conversation. And then when you go to make your point, then go ahead and lean in. The reason I said all of these things first is that if you're meeting in the same spot all the time, every time, where other people are meeting, that's what we call a pattern. And we all know the saying, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting a different result. Well, you have to break that pattern. You can't go in doing the same thing that you've been doing all these times and expecting something different. So break it. Go to a coffee shop. Second, one of these things, and I would say this is especially true for men. Not all, okay, it's a broad sweeping thing, but think about every movie you've ever seen. When men have a heart-to-heart conversation, they're sitting by a lake. They're not facing each other.
No,
They're sitting by a game. They're sitting by, they're watching something. They're doing something like they're not facing each other when they're having that difficult or deeper conversation. They're on the golf course. They're doing something, right? So when you're having that conversation, for you to lean in, usually on a man's side, it feels like it feels a little more threatening. It's a little more uncomfortable. It's
an intrusion.
Yeah. So one of our jobs is to create safety, make people feel safe, and then have the conversation. And one of the ways to make people feel safe, especially men in authority, is to have a means of meeting with them where you're not directly facing them. And so, so she got an incredible raise after she had that conversation, by the way. And then another person called a CEO of a large nonprofit. She was a rising, she was a new CEO, young woman in an old boys network with the person who founded the organization was a scientist, and the whole organization was based on his work. And so it was time for the organization to move to a new level. So she was stepping into the CEO role. And she told me she's having a really difficult time since stepping in that role because the guy who founded it is always, huffing and puffing or in meetings, undermining and saying things. And so I told her this thing about not facing directly when you have the hard conversation. And she's like, do you think a walking meeting would work? And I was like, yeah, I do. Try it. And so she did, and their relationship just improved dramatically.
Yes.
And it became more collaborative. They became more aligned. And so I would say the thing that most of us mess up on with influence is that we're not deliberate. We think about what we're going to say, but we don't think about how we're going to say it, or in which context. Where are we going to say it? When are we going to say it? Why are you waiting till the end of the day after they had a long, hard day and they're frustrated? Now you're going to have the meeting? No.
And how we want the other person to feel.
Yeah.
As we're having this conversation, because that's just what you're saying. Is if we think about this, knowing that even way back when, and I'm sure you looked at the studies about little kids when they were looking at little boys and little girls, talking with each other, and the little boys were facing just what they found it with adult men too, facing, side by side, facing the lake, or with little girls, they are looking at each other and leaning in to connect deeply. And so respecting that difference and realizing like, okay, I'm wanting to be heard and I would like to influence my male boss or customer, whoever it is. And if I lean in and look straight at them, it's a lot of intensity. It feels threatening. They feel at risk a little bit, or like they're going to be put in a tough position. And I'm not likely to really connect. I'm trying to connect, but it's not. It's like love languages, right? So it's influence languages. But you were making me think of something funny, Ed, when you were talking about this, how she said, or you advised her to say, to keep her outside coat on and say, I want to talk about something. It's personal. I don't want to sit down here, and just start walking. And he's thrown off balance, I imagine, by
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I try to get women to do is create balance, because we know when our organization or a leadership team is out of balance, in terms of women's voices or perspectives, the talent that women have, regardless of gender. Talent is not gendered, but when we're out of balance in organizations, we can feel it. We know that that's happening. And you just made me realize, like, sometimes throwing someone off balance
Hmm.
slightly,
Yeah.
not to the
Yeah.
panic zone, but
Right. Right.
throwing them off balance slightly can be exactly what creates balance, or it paves the way for balance. And in that, it was a conversation. So her, saying she wanted to talk about a personal matter and starting to walk away, not having the same old conversation in the office, threw him off balance, but it created the pathway for a balanced conversation. It's just, yeah, wow. Okay.
It's a way of snapping to attention. It's like imagine you're just driving down the road, you don't remember the whole drive, you're just cruising along and you arrive at your destination. But what if while you're driving, all of a sudden a deer runs out in front of you? You snap to attention. You're fully aware. You jump. It's like that. If a slight moment of change that breaks a pattern, then that can be the thing that snaps people to attention. And
Yeah,
then
all
you
your
have
senses are on alert.
yeah, yeah, and also and oftentimes, sometimes in the workplace, when somebody works somewhere for a long time, especially a woman in a supportive role, like let's say she's somehow supporting the person who is the viewed leader, right? And trying to you might be next in line, you might think you would be, but you're not, because you're sort of cast into a role that where you're that one that gets everything done, you're the one that does this, and so whoever is the leader needs her to be there, right?
Yeah.
um,
I just did an
what,
episode on the strong second role. I
oh,
mean, you are speaking exactly to what I was talking about in that
okay,
episode, about getting stuck in that strong second role. And it's not always necessarily a position. You could stay in the
right,
same position,
yeah,
but it's the role you're cast in. It's what people see, and they think of you as being that support person.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and so
Yeah.
and because they can't even see you in the other role in that future unless you break the pattern somehow. You have to somehow break that pattern. If
I'm
you
so
don't break
glad
the
you talked about
pattern, you're going to
this.
be stuck in that pattern. What's that?
Right.
I'm sorry, I
And
didn't hear what
I
you.
just said I'm so glad that you mentioned this, because it's absolutely about breaking the pattern of how it is how people are seeing you. It's not necessarily the role, because you could stay in, let's say, a deputy director role, and you could be seen as the sidekick, the trusty sidekick, and that's good, and you'll be in that job forever. They're never going to get rid of you, right? But you can't make the impact that you want to, perhaps, unless you break that pattern, how they're seeing you. And even if you stay in the same role, you can get so many more opportunities to make a difference.
Yeah. I'm going to share something with you. When I was taking my conversational hypnotherapy final exam, okay, so it was after a year and a half of study, and then we had an in-person thing for a week, and then we sat down, and so the conversational hypnotherapist teacher is watching two of us have a conversation. And the person who was having the conversation with me, he was his turn to be tested, right? And so we're having a regular conversation, and at one point, I didn't even know this was hidden somewhere inside of me, but I broke down and started crying because he told the story. This happened to be at a time when my leadership role was changing, and I didn't want the new leadership position. And so he's having this conversation with me, and he starts telling the story of Magellan. this explorer, right? And he said, do you know who went along with Magellan? And I was like, no, I mean, I remember the basic story, but I don't remember he said, yeah, well, he had a first mate, somebody who was like a guide, and his name was Enrique. And wherever they stopped along the journey around the Earth, the southern hemisphere, wherever they stopped, Enrique translated the languages. You know why? Because he already made the journey.
Wow.
He had already made the journey. And so, but Magellan is the one that sort of brought it to the world, right? Or whatever, through the European, Eurocentric kind of view of history. But the point was, he said, so who are you? Are you Enrique or are you Magellan? And I
Wow.
just I started bawling. I was like, I wanted to be Enrique. But sometimes you actually have a much farther reach if you step into that Magellan spot,
That's right. And
and
that's an internal struggle. That
it
is
is
something
internal.
where,
Yeah.
you have maybe built your own sense of self-respect, I guess, in a way. Maybe I'm using the wrong words, but you've sort of built that on being of service and not seeking the spotlight. And that's really something that we have to get past if we're gonna have the principled leaders, leading us. Because if not, we're going to be bypassed by what we call the spotlight rangers, the folks that are out for
100%.
themselves or out for profit or whatever. And
Yeah.
we want to be led by principled people. And, look in the mirror. Are you the kind of person you think the organization should be led by? And you could say, well, yes, but I don't want to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, if something is happening in your organization and it bothers you, and you look around and you wonder, why doesn't anybody else see this? Am I the only one that sees this? Well, you might be, because you could be the person who should be fixing it. I know that you have, well, volumes of tips and tools and exercises. You're one of the most creative people that I know. So I would love for you, if you can think of something that is able, I guess, something that we could do within this podcast, that is a quick sort of thing for us to learn from or to reflect on. What is something that is like going to the gym? When we go to the gym and we lift the weights, it builds that muscle. Well, how do we build the people muscle, in terms of influence? Is there something you can help us to practice that would increase our influence?
Mm. Yeah. So I would say by far the most vital step for influence occurs before the encounter. Okay. And this is actually simply managing your state. It used to be that I would teach people all the stuff about body language and, if you're standing this way, if you're moving your arms this way, if your body's this way. But the fact is, we can actually only focus on 5 to 9 things at a time at any one time. And usually it's probably closer to 5 to 3.
For
Right?
sure.
Yeah. So if I start to tell you, put your hands here and do this and make sure you expose your neck and whatever, like if I start to tell you those body language things, then it won't help you because you'll be so focused on those that you'll be mechanical or lose the
I call it
connection
being
that's right in front of you.
I
Yeah.
call it being techniquey.
Yeah. Yeah. And so
Doesn't work.
it's not about techniques. It's
No.
about beforehand. If you can change your state, you can get into the optimum state for whatever that thing is you're about to do. If you're about to log into a meeting, before you hit join, manage your state. Get into the optimum state for that meeting. And before you walk into a room, walk into a boardroom, walk onto a stage, manage your state in a way that you would manage your state, but for the optimum outcome. And the reason I say this is because your word choice, your body language, the tone of voice, the pace at which you speak, all of that stuff, even the stories you have available to you, are state dependent. They're state dependent. So if you can shift your state however you need to, for me, I use a doorknob. Whenever I touch a doorknob or a join button, I I take a moment to manage my state. And what's happened is over time, it's become automatic. So I basically this is the frame that I use. You could take it or leave it. There's lots of ways to manage your state. Actually, I think I even have a worksheet on my webpage, 101 ways to
I'm
manage your
sure
state.
you do.
But, but for me, it's a doorknob. And I just think for a moment, on the other side of this door, there's somebody that I need to serve. So I need to be in a state of service. If I'm in a state of service, then I'm curious, right? Then I am like more like, I'm not in a blame frame. I'm in a curiosity frame. I'm not in a, right? Like, so that state change affects your body language. It affects the stories you have available to you. It affects how you ask questions. And questions, I would say, are one of the single most powerful tools you have. If you are the type of person that sits in the background, you think, oh, well, I have to earn my influence, or they'll call me whenever, or you're sitting there, you have something on the tip of your tongue, but you don't want to say it. You don't want to say it. If you ask a question so that they answer it that way, they answer it in the way that you're like, that is one of the best influence tools you have.
Absolutely. I mean,
How you ask the
that's
question
the
will change your answer.
profession of coaching. It is
Yeah,
absolutely the profession of coaching.
absolutely.
And I think that's what a lot of people miss, or they don't realize. The value of coaching is not that you're going to some expert who's going to tell you what to do. That's why a lot of people avoid, seeking out coaching, is
Mm-hmm.
because their ego, won't
Yeah,
let them open up
yeah,
like that.
yeah.
But it totally is not about the other person knowing more than you. It is about you being open to the questions they ask you that help you arrive at your own answers, or the best answer, truly the best answer for you and your organization. So anybody that's had the idea that going to a coach or finding a mentor somehow puts you in a lower status, it absolutely does not. It's allowing someone to influence the way that you're seeing and thinking about things, so that you can do what really is what you believe is the best thing, not just the first thing that comes to mind when you think of a certain topic or decision that you have to make. Another thing that you made me think of is military training. I went to a fantastic course. It was very difficult, and it was the final exercise for selection for this career field. And one of the things that we had to do was manage our state before we knocked on the door. And you can imagine when you are knocking on the door of a local leader, in another country,
Mm-hmm.
and you are trying to pave the way for friendly relations, or asking them to receive help, that we're offering. Well, they're not always friendly. Sometimes it's a permissive environment, sometimes it's a non permissive environment. One of the things that they looked for was that we stopped with our team, took a moment, literally a meditative breathing kind of moment, to manage our state. It's exactly what you're talking about. And not only were we getting ourselves aligned with the energy we're bringing into the room and the outcomes that we want, but also what we got out of that is we were far more observant.
Mm.
We
Yeah,
could, after the meeting, we could report so much more about what was there. And the details do matter in those environments,
yeah,
for
yeah,
us understanding the culture or understanding the connections that they have with others. And so, absolutely, it's about the influence, but it's also how are we going to influence if we aren't noticing everything that's going on,
yeah, yeah.
what's being
It's
said and what's not being said, maybe.
right, right. And if you're not going in that state, you won't even see it. It's
You
not
won't
even
even see
it's
it.
not even on your radar.
You will
You're
miss
th-
it. And
you're thinking
sometimes
about
it's
content, not context, right?
Yeah.
That's what happens.
It
Yeah,
can be anything from when they blink to where they look. Do they look down? Do they look up? And we don't have to know all the specifics like you do, about body language. You're an expert in that, but we intuitively know. We know when we've made a mistake or when we're starting to go down the wrong path with someone. They're not comfortable with something that we're saying. And so, yeah, taking that time to manage our state so that we notice those things,
yeah, yeah,
and that we bring the right energy and intent into the room. So, okay, somebody in the audience is probably thinking right now, that's all great, but how do I even decide, what my state should be? Because you're saying manage your state, make sure you're in the right state. How do
yeah,
you decide what that is?
yeah. Well, so what's interesting is you're already doing it in other situations. So before you walk in and console your friend who had a loss, which we were talking about earlier, you know the state to enter there. If you're about to have a hard conversation with your teenage daughter, you know the state that you need to walk in, right? If you're having a conversation with your older parent about them losing some of their independence, that is a different state, and you're already adept at doing that. The
If you just
question
take the
is,
time.
if you just take the time and
Yeah.
reflect on, like, who shows up when I show up, who walks in when I walk in, what energy comes in, and what context am I shaping, what environment am I shaping when I enter this space? that if you own that, then so much of it flows from there. Then the second part, which you alluded to, is we can detect change. We're really good at it. We're really good at detecting change. You don't have to know body language stuff, but you do have to be able to detect a change. And when you detect a change, perhaps it's what was just said, perhaps it's how it was said, perhaps it's something else. Then you can address it. I'll give you like a very simple example. I was one time walking by a patient's room, and this is after heart surgery. And as I was walking by, I had already seen them in the morning, but I saw that his wife was there. And I dipped my head in and I said, "Hey, Mr. Jones, just want to let you know they're going to get that chest x ray. I'll be back to talk to you in a little bit." As I was about to leave, I saw his wife put her hand up here. It was a change. She was sitting there ready, normal, but then she put her hand up here. And I came back and I was like, "Oh, Mrs. Jones, it's okay. It's the chest X-ray. We always get chest X-rays on the second day after heart surgery. It's not a big deal. We're not worried about anything. I think it's going to be perfectly all right." And she goes, "Oh, it's not that. It's that I'm parked in 2-hour parking, and I was just wondering if this is going to be all right." Right. But here's the thing: if you don't see when you see the change, if you don't address it, then it could spin into some other thing, right? Imagine, so in the case of in a healthcare setting, she could have come out to the desk and started asking the nurse, "Hey, I heard there's a chest x-ray, blah blah blah." The
Yeah,
nurse says, "Oh, that's not my patient, let me go find out who it is." And then they go ask, "Oh, she's a chest x-ray. Oh, I didn't see an order from Dr. Tori." It causes a swirl. The whole swirl is
absolutely.
avoided if you
And
see a
even if it
change and
doesn't
address it.
cause the swirl, even if
Yeah,
it's not misconstrued, you miss an opportunity to connect.
right,
And
absolutely.
I was just meeting with a family about some things, um, and one of the family members, when they were leaving, moved a chair back to center on the table, right? And it was a younger person in the family. And I don't know, what would you think about that if you saw a younger person in the family take the time to fix where the chair was?
Yeah, I appreciate it. Hey,
You just
wow,
don't
okay.
expect that,
Yeah,
right? You don't
yeah.
expect
Oh,
that.
thank you for that.
You don't expect, teenagers to be sensitive to the organization of a room, of an adult's office, right? And so after they left, I texted and I said, please tell her I noticed that she centered the chair and I appreciate that. And it's just that thing, the fact that you noticed that she put her hand on her chest and bothered to check, bothered
Yeah,
to
yeah,
ease her fears if they were there. um, okay, it was unnecessary maybe, but
yeah.
look at the connection that you built by
Right.
noticing what she did and that there was some kind of concern. So you were on as far as that, right? There was a concern. It was just about the parking. But
Yeah. And the other side of that is that we often misread what the thing was. In other words, we have stories in our head. Oh, that like we will have our own stories. In fact, I keep a piece of paper next to me for all my meetings that say the story I'm telling myself is dot dot dot, and then I just write it
that's a
down.
good one.
I just write it down. Like, so if I say, "Oh, they don't like this proposal. They think this, they think that." I write it down. I write down what my story is. And then I question it. Like oftentimes our assumptions are just that, they're assumptions, and so if we keep ourself in a state of curiosity, then we're more likely to get to that better spot. So yeah,
Okay, so we're going to pause to manage our state. And if you need a detailed checklist, you're not going to necessarily get that, although I'm sure Ed has some great things on his website. But it's more about tuning in and listening to what you already know. You don't have to be the expert. I appreciate that you said that. You don't have to be the expert
yeah,
in body language,
right, you don't.
psychology. You just have to care, be curious, and take the time to reflect for a moment on what state should I be in based on the outcomes I'm looking for.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
And then also try other things. You may see somebody that's particularly adept, like let's say somebody gets interrupted. Okay, very common, right? Especially women in leadership. Say somebody gets interrupted, and then you see them, they do sort of like a subtle palm down, uh, let me finish this thought, and then I want to hear your perspective. They do it, and it's so elegant, it's so well received, and the whole meeting tone changes. Afterwards, pull them aside and say, "Hey, I noticed that. I appreciated how you did that. Did you do something like what? How did you prepare for that sort of setting or whatever. Like ask, learn, what do you do to manage your state before this intense type meeting? What do you do before you get on stage and you have to present something or challenging data or something like that?
Yeah.
What do you do?
See,
Ask others and you'll
I'm
learn
not a
from
weirdo, but I have a weird question.
it. Exactly.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, nothing wrong with using that technique at work, because
Right.
if we see people who seem to do something with ease, of
Yeah.
course we can learn that. We don't have to
Right.
become them, but we can learn from one another. And those things definitely matter. And it doesn't matter if it's a man who seems to be influential, just with ease and grace, or if it's a woman. But if it's something that you want to work on, there's nothing wrong with asking somebody. We know we should do this. We know that people are there for us and they're happy to share their perspectives. A lot of people don't realize, they don't even know how they do it. But because I think, like you, they're such natural connectors that it really stumps them for you to ask, how do you do this? Or how do you think about this thing? They have to really like stop and break it down, because it does come so naturally to them. But when you say, I noticed that you did XYZ, like specifically,
Yeah.
your palm was down, but it wasn't threatening. You weren't defensive, like palm up, but it was just a gentle way that you were asking for a pause while you finished your sentence or whatever it was. And if you describe to them, then they can more easily connect with their thinking and what motivated that specific behavior, that specific gesture or whatever. So yeah, being very specific when we ask for feedback.
And also that's a form of a compliment. If you give them a compliment, I saw you did this, it was amazing, it was incredible. And then ask a question about it. So you justify the compliment. You say, I saw the whole room change and etc. And then you say, oh, like, is this something like you practice? I've noticed multiple times you're really adept at keeping the tone of the room a certain way. If you ask a question about it, I'm telling you that you will stick in that person's heart for a very long time. Like it's a
Yes.
compliment that like they will never forget.
Yeah.
So
You're
it's
highlighting
that's
something
part
they
of
may not
leadership.
have even
Yeah,
realized for themselves that they're good
right.
at. Like
And you
that's,
can learn from it too.
yeah.
So
And I
yeah,
said feedback, but I didn't mean that. I actually meant for their genius. You're
yeah,
asking for their genius. Share your genius with me,
yeah, yeah,
because I really
yeah.
admire it and want to borrow it.
And by the way, that would be influence. In other words, we think we're the ones asking for help. But by doing so, you're influencing them because they may see themselves in a way they've never seen themselves before. They may actually show up differently to the next meeting and the next meeting and the next meeting. And all of the while, it was because you sparked it. That's a form of influence. The best form of influence is completely under the radar. It serves, and you didn't want anything in return necessarily, right?
No,
So
yeah,
it's that's sort of the best form.
yeah. Mentors and whether it's mentors, coaches, or somebody's manager, noticing that they have a unique talent and highlighting it, and even asking like, "How do you do that?" It causes the person maybe to use it more, or to realize like they do have a superpower, and then that person can go and do more good out
Right,
in the
right.
world. So yeah, I think it
And
serves in many ways.
another powerful aspect of that is to tell somebody important to them about their superpower. So in
Hmm.
other words, a third party compliment. Because guess what? So essentially, spread good gossip. If you say, "Hey,
I love that.
I really appreciate the way she, said that in the meeting because it opened everybody up in a way that it cut the tension. It made everybody real. Like I really appreciated her work there. So I just thought you'd want to know that she did a really good job in there."
That is
That
amazing.
you know what it does? You know what it does? It increases rapport between you and whoever you're telling. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing it does is it increases rapport between them and the person you talked about. And the third thing it does is it increases the rapport between the person you talked about and you, right? Because you said something, you didn't have an agenda, it was good, you were spreading something good. This is how you change culture in a complex system. You
For sure. Yeah.
influence the people with the connections between people. The connections between people are the vital things. And so in the process, you're encouraging a good behavior, you're telling somebody that's important to them, and it's going to get back to them. And it's going to get back to them not in a
It's
way like,
lovely.
hey, Dalisia was talking about you and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't get back like that. It gets back like, I heard a really good compliment about you the other day. And da, 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 da. Right. And so
Yeah. And then
it's a
it
long
becomes
game.
the folklore becomes fact, and
Yeah,
people
yeah,
start to
exactly.
rely on you for that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I this what you said, the way you phrase that, you may say it all the time, but spread good gossip. That is so meaningful to me because I'm so exhausted with
Mm,
bad gossip. I
yeah.
I don't tolerate it at all. Like I really don't like that. And so this, instead of just saying, you know, we don't allow gossip around here. Okay, well, that's fine, and that sounds like a punishment of some sort. Like we can't have any fun.
Yeah.
But for a leader to even borrow that from you and say, look, we absolutely allow gossip around here, but it's got to be good gossip.
Exactly.
I think
Exactly.
that's a fantastic culture builder. So,
Yeah.
so okay, I want you to speak to the woman who's listening right now who thinks I could never be influential. Maybe I'm too shy to influence people, that people never listen to me. I'm too low on the org chart to influence. Those negative things, or I'll say excuses, that
Hmm.
keep us from influencing, that keep us being the wallflower or that strong, silent second. You know,
Hmm.
Speak to the woman who's got those things in mind. Those
Yeah.
potential, they might not even be real barriers, but they
Yeah.
could be for her mental
Right.
barriers keeping her from being influential.
Yeah. Yeah. So first of all, so these are everything you've described is essentially what we call a limiting belief, right? If you believe it, it limits your ability to even see a different future. It limits your ability to take the next action to move towards that thing. There's all kinds of things on the internet and Facebook, LinkedIn, etc., about limiting beliefs. But
Mhm.
what often they fail to do is to describe the assumptions that underlie them. Every limiting belief has assumptions that underlie them. And so if you can ask yourself, what am I assuming? I'm assuming that, what were some of the examples you said? I'm too shy, right?
Too shy, too low on the org chart.
Yeah. So too low on the org chart. So there's a certain assumption that in order to influence somebody, you have to be high on the org chart.
Mhm.
Well, wait a minute. Just think of your own life experience. Has anyone low on an org chart ever influenced you? Have you ever seen anyone low on an org chart influence? Right? There's a certain
Absolutely.
assumption that it has to be that way. And so oftentimes our assumptions are just that, assumptions. So if we can break down what those assumptions are, we can peel away the limiting belief a little better.
Mhm.
But what I would submit to you though is every single sentence or phrase you said would have been one of the things I would have written down in my this is the story I'm telling myself. The story I'm telling myself is I am too shy to speak up. The story I'm telling myself, well, guess what? Let me tell you something. We just talked about pattern interrupts, right? Well, what happens? The pattern of a shy person is to not speak up. Shy, shy, not speak up, not speak up, not speak up. What happens when they do speak up? Guess what? Everyone listens.
Yes,
Everyone listens.
frequently it is that way. Yes.
Yeah, it's a pattern interrupt. Wait, they haven't said anything. Now they're talking, right? Then what happens? The silent person in that meeting who later speaks up and says something profound, powerful, impactful, or even just a good contribution or asked a good question, they're going to ask again and again. It's just it becomes a way like, hey, Dalisia, you've been quiet. What do you have to say? You always have a good contribution. What are you, right? Then you can
You
help
will be
extract.
invited more
Yeah, you'll be
to
invited more to
yes,
do it,
absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
So that's one of the things. There's assumptions underlying there, and these are just stories we're telling ourselves. Another thing I would say to you is that none of these things are permanent. We talk about them as if they're etched in stone and this is the way it is. Like, no, if you think about other settings, you're not shy in other settings, right? What about the Thanksgiving dinner table with blah blah blah, or maybe out with your friends at it, right? When are you not shy, and how are those interactions? They're wonderful, right? So one of my hypnotherapy teachers one time, but I was talking to him and somebody came up and interrupted. He's like, "I'm sorry, I had to interrupt." He's like, "I just have this challenge with my daughter. She's so stubborn and this and that." And he kept saying stubborn, stubborn, stubborn. And he said it, I don't know how many times. And my hypnotherapy teacher said, "Well, I hope my daughter's stubborn this weekend." He said, "What?" He said, "Well, this is prom weekend for her." And he just left it at that. Bam. It was like, so he took like a trait that we think is bad, and put it in another context, and
Mm-hmm.
it's exactly what you need. So
Yes.
yeah, so I'm saying that's what you are. You're sitting there in, whatever your limiting beliefs are. The fact that you have them is actually the healthy thing. That, like, the fact that you have them is healthy, but to work through them is what will be gold, is what will bring soul to your organization, because you're holding back with these thoughts. It probably means you're the very person whose
Absolutely.
message is needed.
Even the women that say I'm too low on the org chart, what does that really mean? They have respect for leaders, they have respect for people's responsibilities and authority and all of that. That's all good.
Yeah.
So going
Well,
into a conversation where you want to influence for good, I'm going to stress for good,
yeah, yeah,
Ed,
yeah, yeah.
you're going in a state of respect for others.
Right.
That's a
And not only that,
beautiful
you have a
thing.
lens that others don't. If you're so-called low on the org chart, well, then you're seeing stuff that the leaders are not. Well,
How could they? Right? They're
if
not
right,
there.
how could they? They're not there. And so if you're there and you can express it and speak to leaders, or speak to a meeting or a group of people in a way that brings to bear something that is like, sheds light on something, or brings a moment of insight, because you see it, they don't see it. And so you bringing it forward is the very thing. I remember one time I went from being an intern, a resident. I was a resident, chief resident. Then I became I basically finished my residency, and I was asked to be on this committee, and it was all about throughput, how to get people moving through the emergency room and all these things, and
Operational excellence.
operational excellence and all that stuff, right? And when I was there, I was like, you do know that, like, all the residents try to put people into the telemetry floors, the heart monitor floors, because if the heart monitor floor is full, the ambulance bypasses the hospital, and the residents will have less work to do.
Wow.
And they're like, what? Like,
They
yeah,
had no
because
idea.
they had no idea that that's what was sort of like the culture, right? So there are things that are obvious to you wherever you work that are not known whatsoever to the people who are in other parts of the org chart. If you're the one that brings it to bear in a respectful and sort of move the mission forward kind of way, then that is influence, and that is, like, your voice is needed. It's absolutely needed.
Thank you for saying that, because that's the whole point of what I'm doing, is trying to get more women to use their voice and not wait to be asked to dance,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
because we're smart, we're capable, we're generally, we are looking out for the greater good. Not every woman, of course, but
Right, right.
generally women tend to do that. And so who better, if we're good at our jobs and we have the greater good, in our minds and hearts, we should be stepping up and not just waiting to be invited. And so influencing is the path to that, being able to influence decisions and outcomes, where resources are allocated, how people are behaving, the culture of a team. It's all of these things that we're simmering in every day. We're not just left to the mercy, of the culture as it is. You can influence wherever you are.
It's your role. Yeah.
You were given your intellect and your talents and your perspective so that you could do something good with it. Ed, thank you so much for being here. I do want to ask you, is there something that we can put in the show notes that is a good resource for the listeners of the show? Tell us what you think you would like to give us a link to.
Yeah. So I do have a book coming out called Hypnotic Gifts: How to Transform Someone's Life in a Single Conversation. You could get to that from drtori.com, drtori.com. The book's not yet out, but it will be soon, hopefully. And then I do have an influence book club where we go over an influence book each month. There's some videos. You don't necessarily have to even read the book. We have videos we go over, and that are related to the book, materials, challenges, worksheets, etc., that are all related to the book, and then a community where we discuss it. And oftentimes, this is precisely what people are bringing up: leadership challenges, and moving other people for good. And how do we do that? How do we do that in a way that is ethical, and also just true to whatever the relationship is? So Yeah, so that's like influencebookclub.com. That would be something you could point
All
people
right, and
to.
we'll
Yeah,
put those in the show notes. Ed, thank you so
yeah, yeah.
much for being
You're
here and
so welcome.
for tuning us into the fact that we have more ability to influence, that influence can be a good thing. And Ed, thanks for making us just a little bit better at it today.
Yeah.
I
And
appreciate
thanks for
it.
having me. I really appreciate it.
All right, wonderful. All right, everybody have a fantastic week. Get out there and be those frontline leaders that I know you are. We'll see you soon.